Here's the plan. I'm going to start by looking at which refrigerants are flammable and then talk more about flammability and the other safety hazards, a little bit about how to work safely in your safe working environment, and then most of the time I'll spend looking at the safe working procedures and the equipment that you might need that's different from working with flammable refrigerants. So the flammable refrigerants are all the hydrocarbons and some of the HFC type refrigerants, the hydrofluorocarbons. So here we have a list of the most common. On the left-hand side, we have the higher flammability refrigerants, R290 propane, 1270, which is propene or propylene, and R600A, which is isobutane. And then on the right-hand side, we've got R32, R1234, two variations of that, ZE and YF. And then we've got several blends. So the ones on the left are all the hydrocarbons. They have higher flammability. I'll explain what that means later on. And the ones on the right are all HFCs, so they're flammable HFCs, and they have lower flammability and also are known as A2L refrigerants. Again, I'll explain that later. So why do we use them? Basically, we use them because of their very low environmental impact. They all have, in the case of the hydrocarbons, extremely low global warming potentials, or in case of the flammable HFCs, they have fairly low global warming potentials, but all much lower than the non-flammable refrigerants. And we also use them because they're very good refrigerants. In particular, the hydrocarbons perform very well as refrigerants. We use them primarily in systems where the charge is limited. So R600A is used in all of our domestic appliances. The other hydrocarbons, R290 and R1270, are used in commercial plug-in appliances like this, but also in fluid chillers, which are outside in outside air, and also things like heat pumps. R32 is used primarily in split air conditioning and some larger air conditioning systems as well. The blends are used primarily in retail refrigeration. You won't see them being used in very large central plant systems, but they're used in smaller central plant systems, typically with large condensing units or very small packs. And also they're used in some heat pumps. 1234YF is used in vehicle air conditioning, and then the ZE variation is used in a few fluid chillers. But these two are also used as blend components in these blends here in some cases. But the most important thing about this is that the flammability limits how much refrigerant we can use in systems, and also means that there are changes in the design of some systems, in particular around things like sources of ignition and ventilation. A little bit more about the hydrocarbons, because of course we use these hydrocarbons as a fuel. So it's a bit odd that they're also really good refrigerants, but they are. But the version that we use as refrigerants are very high purity, much higher purity than the ones we're going to burn as a fuel. And also they're not stench, so they're odorless, again, like many other refrigerants. They also go by a trade name CARE, which is the BOC trade name. Different compressors are used for R600A. We have to have a bigger displacement compressor when we're using 600A, so they are quite different to the one that you might have used for R134A, for example. And another big difference is that the density of hydrocarbons is a lot less than the density of an HFC. If we look at an example of that, the old Ball's ice cream cabinets used R134A and used 216 grams of 134A. But the ones that now run on R290 propane use only 90 grams of propane to do the same job. So that's an example of the density difference in action. And of course, we also have to think about that when we are filling recovery machines, which I'll talk about later on. So how do you identify if a refrigerant is flammable? The first thing is there should be a flammable gas sticker on the system. But also, if you look at the Danfoss refrigerant slider and look at the refrigerant, then if you click through to the last page, that will tell you what the safety group is. And of course, if it's flammable, it will have a lower flammability level and an auto ignition temperature. And then looking at the cylinders will have, again, a marking on it on them that show that the refrigerant is flammable. So that's the pictogram that you'll see on the cylinders. The cylinders are different with hydrocarbons, and in particular the valve arrangements, but unlike other refrigerants, the non-flammable refrigerants, we are allowed to supply hydrocarbons in small disposable cylinders. Otherwise you'll get all these flammable refrigerants in the larger cylinders as well. The most important point really about this is that all of the cylinder valves, regardless of what size of cylinder and where it comes from, all these cylinder valves are different to the standard valve that you use on other non-flammable refrigerant cylinders. Cylinder storage and transport is very like other compressed gases. When you're storing the refrigerants, always store them with the valves capped, and always the flammable refrigerants store outside if at all possible. You need good ventilation in your storage area. Transport is in accordance with the international ADR regulations. You're almost certainly going to be below the threshold of those regulations, in which case you need an awareness of the hazards of what you're carrying. The vehicle needs to be ventilated. You should carry a 2 kilogram dry powder fire extinguisher. Make sure the cylinders are secure, obviously not having the adapter on there, the valves closed and capped, and display a flammable gas warning diamond on the outside of your vehicle.